But are these super profits and are the current tax and royalty regimes denying federal and state governments and indirectly the taxpayer legitimate revenue?
Thanks, Alan. Yes, and we certainly agree on that. We have, as you said, the federal government has inherited $1 trillion of debt. We are all going to be paying for that for decades to come. And so I am pointing the finger firmly at a group of companies that need to pay what I consider to be even a remotely fair share of corporate tax. And at the end of the day, they're also using public assets for their private gain. So they need to pay a fair degree of royalties on those finite assets. And so with that, I'm talking about the royalty, the PRRT, the Petroleum Rent Resources Tax, or in New South Wales, the coal royalty that is a limited resource and it is different to corporate tax. So I would stress that I'm recommending a reform of the royalty systems and a cleaning up of the multinational tax.
We'll come to some figures in a moment, which are absolutely staggering, I have to say, because as viewers here know, I'm all for the fossil fuel industry. But Tim is making the point about what should be the appropriate social dividend that should flow from the use of yours and mine, and Tim's finite sovereign resources. Now, Tim, you've done an analysis in which you talk about the equitable multinational corporate taxation and royalty regime. Not complicated, so viewers don't get worried about the titles here. This is just about fossil fuel resources. Now, the figures would suggest that what we have is not equitable. You're saying, which will force corporations, of course, to jump up and down, that a fairer corporate taxation and royalty regime would contribute an estimated $322 billion in corporate tax and royalty income over the coming decade to state and federal governments. I mean, these are big numbers, aren't they? And they're not unjust or unfair.
Correct. And that's really, I mean, I lived in Singapore 20 years ago and I was ecstatic that I was paying a 15% tax rate on my income as a foreigner. And all my staff were laughing at me. They were all Singaporeans. They paid 2 or 3% income tax. Now, they're numbers that no Australian could ever even dream of, but that was a positive incentive to reward the residents, the citizens of Singapore, and the foreigners paid a higher tax rate. Australia's got it round the wrong way. Our Australian corporates, Australian listed companies, domestically domiciled, like BHP, like Wesfarmers, have all paid a very full 30% tax rate for my entire 30-year history. Now, it does come down to love him or hate him. Paul Keating introduced franking, and that is a massive incentive for domestic Australian companies to pay corporate tax. The trouble is, we have firms, multinationals, who don't benefit from franking, but they also are able to use legal loopholes. So they're working within the laws of Australia, but they're using them to their own benefit to make sure they pay no corporate tax. Now, I'll cite Exxon. $71 billion of revenue. That's not profit, that's revenue in the last 7 years generated in Australia, and they haven't paid 1 cent of tax.
Say that again.
Yeah. $71 billion of revenue, according to the Australian Tax Office transparent